Welcome to Techtical. Today we will be firing up my $86 all secondhand PC, otherwise known as the Shitbox, and putting it through the ringer versus 5 games that are currently on sale in the Steam store as a part of the winter sale. Purpose of this series is to take the minimum specs listed on product pages and replace them with real world actual footage and experience to give you an idea as to whether or not it will run on a Shitbox of your own. And in this episode we're going to be featuring 5 games that looked kind of interesting, I suppose, and we're all RPGs by a very loose and liberal definition of the term. First up, we have a game called Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen. First released in 2012 for consoles, it has since been ported to PC, very successfully I might add, and has given the game a bit of a second wind. In my opinion, it kinda got lost in the shadow of Skyrim back when it was released, which sort of set a new standard for open world RPGs, and yes, this game does lack a little bit of the fleshing out and the volume and the playtime of a Skyrim. It's still definitely worth checking out. Being that I'm currently playing through this game myself and have played it on 3 different systems with what I would say are equally spaced in terms of their spec, I can say that this game translates pretty well no matter where you play it, and as you can see from the footage here, the same is true for the Shitbox. It makes use of the system resources it has available quite well. CPU load distribution is good, there's no stuttering, nothing like that would make it grossly unplayable. Now if there is one issue I had with this game, and believe me, there weren't many, it was that the draw distance detail had to be scaled down to low with the rest of the settings on medium in order to achieve a 60 FPS average or better, which you can see here. Didn't make much of a difference in terms of my experience or the immersiveness of the game. I think it still looks pretty great for what it is altogether, but of course if you want to pump that up to medium, you'll just have to sacrifice what looks to be about 20 FPS, dropping you down to the mid-40s on a system like this. The game is currently featured on Steam for a historical low of $16 as a part of the Winter 2016 sale. That's a perfectly justifiable price to pay, and I certainly wouldn't begrudge you for doing it, but if you are particularly keen on waiting, I think there's a good chance you'll see this pop up in a Humble Bundle once again sometime soon, as it was most recently featured in the December 2016 Humble Monthly, which is a good sign that Capcom is starting to loosen the purse strings a bit and give up on the price premium for this game, which is not atypical of ports. Anyhow, bottom line is this game is most definitely Shitbox approved. Next up we have a game called Styx, Master of Shadows. Steam is definitely stretching the definition of RPG with this one, but being that it's a spin-off of another pure-blood RPG called Of Orcs and Men, I guess we can forgive it. Definitely better classified as a fantasy stealth game, if such a thing even exists. You play as a little crotchety goblin named Styx. There's a lot of swearing. I counted 3 fucks in the first 10 minutes. If you like that sort of thing, this game is perfect for you. To achieve the desired target FPS of 60, some settings had to be scaled back a few notches, but there was actually a surprising amount of room left to go further. Not a single issue with smoothness of any kind was encountered during experimentation, even when the action got hot. Nothing but thumbs up there. Being that we are presently amidst the winter sale of 2016, it is no surprise that the game is currently on sale for $7.50 American, about $8.24 Canadian, which is a historical low, and it has also been bundled twice before by Humble. Being that the sequel is just around the corner, and I mean a sliver of a cunt hair around the corner, due out in March of 2017, it wouldn't surprise me to see this bundled 1 or 2 more times. Take us now to 2011. Of course, the world is basking in the glow that is Skyrim, one of the most influential RPGs ever released, and once again, another studio decides to release a competitive product. Kingdoms of Amalur, at least I think that's how you pronounce it, was the result. I usually just say Kingdoms of Alamar, like the baseball player, Roberto Alomar. And speaking of baseball players, the guy who owned the studio that made this game was Kurt Schilling, and his studio went bankrupt and was investigated for misusing grant money from the government of Connecticut or some shit. I can't remember the details exactly, but speaking of the game itself, I don't think anyone would deny that this is a good game, but because of when it was released and the competitors that it faced, it kinda got lost in the mix. That said, the graphics are gorgeous despite the fact that they are cartoony and very World of Warcraft-ish. The combat is a highlight, sort of compared to Arkham games, or maybe even like Assassin's Creed or Shadow of Mordor in terms of its fluidity and its fanciness. And most of all, the setting and the story were co-authored by a guy named R.A. Salvatore, who is the inventor of a black-faced elf named Dristo-Urden that a lot of you might be familiar with, and if you're not, you should be! As I already said, the graphics are a little bit cartoony and wowish. This results in a few sacrifices in the polygon count, I guess, and makes the game easier to run because all the sliders during my testing were maxed the fuck out on my little 560 Ti, and I still got an average of 90 frames per second at 1080p. Nothing but thumbs up there. And as for the sale price of this item, it is always the same as far as I can tell. I don't think I've ever seen it deviate from its standard sale price of $5 for the base game, or $10 for the collection, which includes the 2 DLC and a bunch of other shit that was released later on. I would definitely recommend the latter if you're interested in getting the whole experience, as the 2 DLC alone are quite worth it. And being that EA is the publisher of this game, it should be no surprise to anyone that this game has not yet been featured in a bundle, and I would not hold your breath waiting for said thing to happen. Next up, we have a game called Mordheim, City of the Damned that I felt like including because I just got it in the Humble Monthly and figured it was worth a look. It's a lot like Valkyria Chronicles and XCOM, but in a dark fantasy setting, nothing wrong with that. Great couch game for play on a TV, a la the Shitbox, as controller-centric turn-based strategy games on the PC are not the most abundant. It's also listed as an RPG, which is why I felt it was fitting for this video, but once again, I think that might be a bit of a stretch even by the most liberal definitions of the word RPG. Turn-based games are a bit more forgiving performance-wise because frame rate isn't nearly as critical, but that wasn't an issue here. I got a solid 60 to 80 frames per second with the settings somewhere in the middle, which gives you a lot of wiggle room to go up or down depending on your preference and your budget and the graphics card you employ. There were no issues to report, no stutter, no CPU bottlenecking, all good and all clear. Price-wise, you can expect to pay about 15 bucks Canadian for this thing, which appears to be its all-time low. Don't expect it to budge anytime soon as the game is still relatively new, released within the last year, but given the reviews it's getting and the fact that its player base is probably dwindling, you never know. It did appear in the Humble Monthly, as I mentioned before, so once again, don't be surprised if it pops up a second time in the near future. And lastly on the docket, we have Baldur's Gate on crack, otherwise known as Pillars of Eternity, which is probably the best new CRPG to hit the market in a decade. Surprisingly though, and deceptively, it is difficult to run, as most owners of the game will probably tell you. Once again, real-time with pause and turn-based games allow for a bit more flexibility on frame rate, and while Pillars is indeed playable, ranging from about 24 to 60 depending on the scene, it varies wildly enough to be somewhat bothersome for really picky people. Oddly enough, examining the load profile for this game didn't uncover any obvious problems either. All 4 cores on the CPU were resting well below maximum, while the GPU never exceeded 65%. Without knowing precisely what the issue might be, it's hard to speculate any further. If you recall my Shitbox episode involving Grim Dawn, the reason that game got a failing grade was due to the heavy single-core CPU load that resulted in unbearable stuttering, likely stemming from the outdated Titan Quest engine it was built upon. While the frame rates in Pillars do indeed leave a lot to be desired, the performance was smooth enough to get a thumbs up. Couple that with the fact that it's not an action game and one can take their time in playing, and I think Pillars gets a passing grade, albeit barely. Price-wise, it's currently sitting at $20 Canadian here in the Steam store. Definitely a good deal, but considering there are 2 expansions that you should probably buy along with it that seem to be well reviewed, it might not be a bad idea to wait for the Game of the Year or Complete Edition before adding it to your library. And it's never been bundled before and probably won't be in the near future, so don't hold your breath. And just as a little addendum to that Pillars of Eternity segment there, I really don't know why system resources were unallocated during the play of that game. The GPU was being only half utilized and the CPU was perfectly comfortable. I'm gonna have to look into it. Maybe I'll do a separate video on it because it's a little weird and Google doesn't seem to have any answers for me. So I think what we're gonna do going forward with the Shitbox series is split it into 2 distinct video parts. We're gonna have one that is dedicated to single games that are popular, that a lot of people are interested in, that a lot of people want to play, and focus a whole video on those by themselves. And also we're going to do bigger videos like this with 10 or even 20 games in rapid fire succession just to get that curator list filled out. Because as you know, I have a Steam group and a curator that I'm trying to develop here. Basically what I want to do is put the Shitbox stamp of approval on every single game that meets the minimum specs and actually performs as it's intended, to sort of replace minimum requirements that are listed on product pages, because those are shit. We want real world information, and if you believe in this project, you want to come along. Anyway, I think you get the gist. Follow me on Twitter, leave a like, because it helps so fucking much to do that. Believe it or not, that's how I get views. If you like me and my stuff and my simple gray shirt, click the fucking like button. But sincerely, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.